thank you for taking a little bit of time out of your schedule to not only hear from day 7, but to hear about this topic in anticipation of some good work that is coming in September. I know Candace will tell you a little bit more about that, but this is kind of like a sneak peek of what's to come, and I hope it's a good sneak peek.
Yeah, definitely. So Dr. Bonner, he's with Lipscomb. He's a leadership consultant with a background in family systems, and he's also a conflict mediator. He has a company called Leadership Mediation Systems, and he has been a provider in our Day 7 network for quite some time, become a friend of mine, and also will be our newest board member in a short period of time as well. So we are just really thankful for you, Steve, and thankful for your involvement in Day 7. I've gotten to work with Steve quite a bit, and he's done a presentation for us in the past that was really, really good. And so we, of course, reached out to him as we started planning some of these virtual events we have moving forward. So one thing that he just kind of mentioned is our Self-Care Summit. It's a virtual event in September 14th through the 18th. We have 17 presenters presenting on topics ranging from nutrition to Steve on leadership. We have conflict mediators. We have a comedian presenting on the importance of laughter and stress reduction. We have a yoga instructor, mindfulness facilitators, therapists presenting on a variety of topics. So it's called the Virtual Self-Care Summit, Finding Balance Between Self and Community Care. So we hope that you all will look into joining us in September. I'll share a little bit more information about that at the very end on how to do that. But this presentation today is the second in a little short mini series that we're doing just to give you all a taste of what's to come in September, and also offer you a valuable resource to use in your workplaces right now and in your personal lives. So today, Dr. Bonner is presenting on anxiety and anxious leadership. And so we are just thrilled to have you here, and I'll let you take it from here. I plan to, just a couple, sorry, logistics. I plan to turn my video off just to not be a distraction. Y'all can focus on the slideshow that Steve will be sharing. But if you have any questions, comments along the way, I know that Steve will be asking for some feedback, and you can use the chat feature if you want to answer any of his questions in the chat feature. And we'll be doing a Q&A time at the end. And so there's also a Q&A feature that you can find at the bottom of your screen. So if you have questions during or towards the end, feel free to put them there, and we will be able to address those. So thank you so much, Dr. Bonner.
Excellent. Thank you, Candace. And again, welcome to all of you who are just joined us or joined us a little bit ago. It's so good to have you. And I'm really excited to present on this topic, particularly in kind of regards to many of the things that we're dealing with in our world today. So what I want to do in this presentation is I want to give a little bit of background about myself and how I kind of came to this work, this important work of thinking about anxiety, but thinking about anxiety from a systems perspective, and then take you into the 6 triggers. I'm going to share with you some of my conversation partners or my kind of mentors who have taught me some things. And I really do hope that this time is time well spent. So our presentation today is anxious leadership. Regulating reactivity is not an option. We live in highly anxious time right now. I mean, school is just around the corner. I'm seeing in the news, I'm reading articles, conversations in my own family about what's going to happen, what is the new school year going to look like? How are students going to go to school remotely or in person? What are the risks that are associated with all of this? A lot of people are anxious, and when we think about anxious leadership, this is particularly poignant. Now, I want to just clarify one thing before I go on. When I talk about or refer to leadership, What I'm referring to is, as a leader, is anyone who leads. That this could be in a home system, this could be at work, this could be in a nonprofit, this could be in a business, an institution. This could be in government. My estimation is that we all are leaders. And you're going to hear me in a little bit challenge some of the kind of traditional leadership wisdom that is out there. But first, I want to go back just a little bit. I want you to understand where I'm coming from and how I kind of got to this. Well, when I graduated high school way back in 1990, I went straight into the Army. And within a little bit of time, I was a 67 uniform, which is a Chinook, basically a mechanic, a Chinook helicopter mechanic. In a short amount of time, I found myself as a crew chief and then as a flight engineer. And it was then really that I think I was trained to think systemically, to pay attention to how things work together. Now, we think about this realistically, people are fit together in systems, but we often don't. We often think in a linear fashion instead of a systemic fashion. But as I've taught over the years and reflected on my own background, this is, I think, where it all started. It gave me a lens by which to see how things are tied together, how they fit together. Also, my marriage, and as a husband, and in my family as a father. I've been married to my beautiful wife Amy for 27 years. I have 3 children. The oldest is married. He's 25. Then I have a 20-year-old, and then 2 males, and then a daughter who has just turned 17. In fact, my oldest will be turning 26. Is it 25 or 26? Oh goodness, he's going to get me later. Here at the end of August. So, is anyone who's been married as long as I have, you figure out a lot of ways not to do things, and you begin to see how your decisions and your relationships are linked together, tied together. So this has shaped and formed me over the years from my ministry background and through my academic background. It was really in my academic and my ministry background, they're kind of tied together. I learned how to and was trained to think systemically in my graduate work. And then when I started teaching, I started applying that thinking across the board. And you'll get some of that as we go through. But that's just a little bit about me and how I got to this point. Well, what I want to do, if you're not familiar with systems, particularly family systems, I want to give just a quick historical sketch here. Now, many of you may be familiar with family systems background, and this will be a little bit of review, although I suspect I'll be introducing a couple people that you may not have heard that have specifically influenced me. Well, one of the primary name associated with family systems thinking is Murray Bowen. Just give you a little bit about him. He's a psychiatrist. He was actually born in Tennessee, the East Mountains of Tennessee. Most interestingly, he worked at the National Institutes of Health in the DC area and then moved to Richmond, Virginia and worked in a hospital there. Well, what is fascinating about his work is he worked with people who were institutionalized with a variety of psychiatric disorders. But he observed something I've seen in ministry, that these persons seem to respond well to treatment while they were in the institutional setting. But when they return to their families or to the, quote, real world, they often experienced a relapse. So what Bowen began doing was, it led him to a new approach. He began institutionalizing the entire family. Now, you can imagine how difficult that must have been, but he experimented with this new way of treating his quote unquote patients. This was a significant shift in thinking, in operating, right? He was operating from a new set of assumptions, and he asked this question: what would happen if we moved from treating one individual member of the family to treating the entire family as a unit. That shift in thinking led to what he began to develop and what is known today as family systems theory. The second character I want to share with you is Edwin Friedman. Edwin Friedman was a student and a patient of Murray Bowen's. And it's Murray Bowen's basic systemic foundations that influence Friedman's work, but also influence my work. Friedman was a Jewish rabbi. He was born in New York. He served in a variety of roles in Washington, D.C., really for nearly over 30 years. He was a rabbi. He was an advisor to the Johnson administration. He was a therapist, a teacher, conference leader, and of course, a writer. And as I said before, he has a unique position of being both a patient and a student of Murray Bowen. Now, Friedman's major contribution to the field of Bowenian family systems theory was his application of systems thinking to church and synagogue. And as he began to think that way, he ended up publishing a book, a groundbreaking book called Generation to Generation, Family Process in Church and Synagogue. What Friedman did is he took the rather academic and tedious work of Bowen and translated it somewhat into a simpler form and applied the theory to local synagogues and local churches. Now, this book was a watershed event. In that book, Friedman outlined a new way of looking at ministry and at leadership in the congregation. And it really, what he did is he took a quantum leap away from the faddish approach to improvements in ministry, like learning the latest techniques, time management seminars, attending conferences, reading the latest book, that kind of stuff, really just working harder. And it's not to say that those things aren't good. It's that they can become faddish and kind of an add-on to, in his perspective, one's ministry. Instead, he proposed something much more difficult. He proposed a new way of looking at life, a new way of functioning, of being in life, and most importantly, a new way of relating to others. Finally, I want to introduce you to Peter Stinky. Peter Stinky was actually a student of Friedman's, and has been speaking and still is speaking and writing on this subject of systems, and particularly systems thinking applied to leadership. He is an internationally recognized leadership consultant. He was a parish pastor. He wasn't a pastor of Paris, a parish pastor. He was a therapist, an educator, and he was also the executive director of Healthy Congregations. And as far as I can tell, Stinky is the author of at least 10 books. Uproar came out last year. It is a fantastic read. So these are my dialogue partners, some dead, some still alive, and of course my students, my family, my memories. All of these come into play as I wrestle with what it means to think systemically in terms of leadership. So what I want to present to you is what follows here is Leadership, a Failure of Nerve. Now, some of you may be familiar with Friedman's book by that title, A Failure of Nerve. Some of his thinking informs my thinking and Stinky's thinking as well. You're going to see some quotes. Here's one right here. Despite the rash of books written on leadership in the last 2 or 3 decades, we have not seen an increment in effective leadership throughout the institutional world. Now that's a pretty bold statement by Peter Stinky here. What he's saying is there's been a plethora of books and conferences, et cetera, on the topic of leadership, but we've not really seen any growth or that impact and create overall effective leaders. Why is that? Well, leadership today has some very kind of fundamental assumptions. Well, if you're going to be a good leader, well, then you've got to have particular personality traits. Some would say you have to be extroverted, or if you're a fan of the Enneagram, then you need to be an 8, or you need to be this number, or you need to be this lineup of letters, right? You have to have, or you're a natural leader if you have these kind of personality traits, or you're a leader if you exercise a particular kind of presence, right? And whether that's in your family, whether it's in your business, no, it doesn't matter where that is. But you also need to be competitive. Be competitive. What does it look like to be a leader if you're not competitive? You need more knowledge, some would argue. You need to be able to have knowledge about this, have knowledge about that, be able to be emotionally intelligent. And I'm not saying that's not important, but you notice, if you've been looking at this long enough, there's these waves of kind of faddish things but people are saying you need to pay attention to in order to be effective. And what Bowen and Friedman and Stinky and what we're saying is, actually, it's much harder than that, but it's much more consistent and true to human nature. Oh, you've got to be bold, right? You've got to be a bold person, be able to express your thoughts in bold and fantastic ways. Or what you really need is just access to more data. You're going to hear about the data piece a little bit more. But one of the things that Friedman says, I think it's really interesting. He says there's actually 3 emotional barriers to effective leadership. And one of them is the fallacy of data. We keep hearing all about data. If we just had more data, we could make better decisions. But the reality is, and just think about this, it leads to 2 myths: that I can be a more effective leader if I have more knowledge, or I just use the right technique. And I think we all know that that's not true. And yet we keep hearing about it. We keep hearing about it. Well, I'm curious, what would you add to this list? And go ahead and use the chat feature here. I'd like to see what you might add to this list of effective leadership or leadership assumptions that are produced today. Anybody have any that you'd like to add to this list? Everybody has their kind of own, they're under a strong communicator. Thank you. Yes, you've got to be able to communicate well, right? Ability to adapt. I'm going to talk about that piece in just a little bit. Thank you. This is fantastic. Fearlessness, right? You've got to have a particular way of attacking problems. Visionary. Leadership assumption, you have to be the loud one. Oh goodness, these are fantastic. Building and serving a team. Oh, these are all very good. These are assumptions that we all kind of carry around with us, and it leads people to believe, in my thinking, that if you can't be all of this, then you can't be an effective leader. And I disagree with that. I disagree with that wholeheartedly. Sure, are there leaders who have these characteristics? Yes. Are there leaders out there who we never hear from because we've already predetermined what a leader is supposed to look like? Very, very interesting. Season 5 of, Revisionist Podcast. I think it's episode 1, 2, or 3. I'd recommend you listen to episode 3 about this very reality, about our assumptions when it comes to how we choose our leaders. All right, very good. Great thoughts here. I love the participation. Thank you so much. Now, what I want to do for a second, what I'm going to do a little bit here is I want to think about leadership in the context of a pathogen. All right, so we are well aware of what is going on in our society and in our world right now. And we're all aware of the COVID-19 virus. And so I want you to think in terms of a virus and how invasive this virus has been. I was just on a call earlier, 10:30 this morning, and one of my colleagues at work his wife has been diagnosed, his son has been diagnosed. Now he and his other child are being tested. We're hearing more and more and more of this. But when you think about viruses, what characteristics come to mind? Well, one of them is the viruses have no boundaries. Now, I'm not using scientific language here. I am not a scientist in that regard, but this basic idea, viruses don't have boundaries. They invade the kind of the boundaries of other cells, other beings, right? They do not respect the boundaries so not only do they not have their own boundaries, they don't respect boundaries of others. And they must have their own way. There's no way around that. They've got to have their own way. And honestly, they do not learn from experience. Since they're not a living entity, they just persist. They just do what they're basically designed to do. They replicate. Well, think about ineffective leadership. Ineffective leaders don't have boundaries either. Think about that. They don't have boundaries either. They don't tend to understand where self begins and self ends, and they certainly don't respect the boundaries of others. Right? They are people who must have their own way. They don't learn from experience. And we don't have to really think too hard about this. I mean, just really, viruses, demagogues, parasites, bullies, and those who do not take into account the emotional well-being of others all function the same way. They don't respect the boundaries of others. I mean, think about in the last several years, religious leaders across the board. Think about political leaders continuing to serve their donors' needs and their own re-election aspirations instead of the needs of the people. Think about business figures who have been indicted for deceptive practices. Colleges and universities that protect faculty and even protect students who prey on others. Researchers who fudge their results. Locally, you might think of citizens who violate the boundaries of others. This is truly an epidemic in our culture, and some would say, perhaps I'm the only one who would say this, a leadership pandemic, to kind of play on these terms. We are certainly leadership deficient at all levels and in all systems in which we operate. A leader who feels entitled or special may be tempted more than others to transgress or trespass on another. Here's a picture of world leaders who, 2020 world leaders who have an Instagram profile. And you just kind of glance across these pictures. Some of these folks, these women and men you may not know, many of them you may. And just think about how these people function as leaders, how we've kind of assumed particular things about them, but really when you look back on their kind of record, you begin to see violations, virus or pathogenic responses all around. So leadership thinking is still focused on expertise. We just get more expertise. If I can just improve the skill set, go to the next seminar, the next, et cetera, and or just get more data. I would argue we need leadership that is rooted in presence. Think about that. Leadership that is rooted in presence. Someone who understands who they are in the moment as they're related to or relating to other people. We need leaders at all levels who are self-aware. That is, they are aware of themselves and how they relate to others. And we need leaders that are rooted in responsible and responsive selves. That is, they know who they are, they know what their limitations are, and they know how to relate to others. Notice I keep referring to that relatedness. What is missing, in my estimation, is the ability to work through emotional processes. Now, Bowen would say, leaders can impact systems positively with clarity, conviction, differentiation, presence, and calm functioning. Friedman will even go a little bit further, and he'll say leaders suffer a failure of nerve by providing quick fixes, which deny opportunities to challenge people. So let me just stop there for just a moment. Let me go back here, and let me ask you: have you seen this? Just reply in the chat. Have you seen leaders who, in responding or reacting to some kind of situation, opted for the quick fix? This could be in your family. This could be at work. If you have an example, share with us an example in the chat. And I'll just keep on speaking here. When I talk about emotional processes, I'm gonna talk about this a little bit more, but what I'm talking about is the awareness of how people function together. And I'm not talking about being emotive, but I'm talking about the things that bind us together, that energy that kind of binds us together. Has anybody experienced a leader, or perhaps yourself, where you defaulted to a quick fix and actually denied opportunities to challenge people, to step up, to kind of take control of their own situation? Any examples out there? Well, go ahead and add them. I'm going to go ahead and continue in the presentation. Now, what I want to do is I want you to imagine a system, and a leader is at the center of this system. And the circle in the center represents a strong boundary. The arrows there represent relationship. Now, they go both ways. These are relationships of reciprocity and mutuality. This is an example of a well-differentiated system. Now, this system could be in your home. This system could be at work. This could be in your school, in your nonprofit. It doesn't matter. The leader at the center is well differentiated. The leader knows her boundaries. The leader knows how to function in relationship and how to engage in relationships of mutuality and reciprocity with the people in her system. But let's imagine for a moment that this leader begins to function anxiously. That is, they begin to react to some sort of real or imagined stimulus. Something's happened. Perhaps a pandemic has broken out, or there's been some sort of issue show up in the work system, or some sort of reality or unexpected reality has occurred in their family. When something occurs like that, there's some kind of precipitating event. A leader will often begin to function anxiously. And what happens is that anxiety begins to grow. They become more reactive. Their reactivity begins to grow, and they begin to operate in this area of blame displacement. That is, they start blaming someone else for a failure. And in this idea, this notion, anxiety becomes more habitual. Now, I want you to imagine that it is growing. The boundaries become blurred. They are violated. Relationships begin to suffer. People are, or particularly the leader, is easily hurt. At this point, anxiety becomes really structured into the system so that the system doesn't know how to operate without that function and anxiety. This is what Bowen learned so many years ago when he took the person who was symptomatic out of the system and began to treat them. That person began to heal, that is, recover. But when that person went back into the system, that system functioned in a particular way to bring that person back into the original homeostasis and thus a relapse. And so what Bowen realized is that a system can function in a chronic state of anxiety. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. Imagine, though, that this virus-like pathogenic personality of this leader continues to grow. Their thinking will become very black and white, either or, yes, no thinking. They'll become very willful. right? And they begin to perceive themselves as a victim. Their thinking is unimaginative, and they're not really good at self-regulating at all. They're easily and quickly hurt, and they always have their focus on others, always blaming others. It's never them, right? That's the kind of leadership I'm talking about. And you may not have to think too hard to think of examples in media today of this very real reality. So what I want to do is, with a little bit of background, is I want to share with you the 6 common triggers of anxiety, and there are a lot of triggers of anxiety. We know that there are triggers. Money creates triggers, right? Or lack of money creates triggers. Trauma, when you're betrayed, difficult people, right? But Peter Steinke, over all these years, narrowed it down in his work to 6. And I find that these 6 are consistent with my own experience. And what I want to do is I want to share these with you, examples of what this might look like. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time unpacking what it looks like. Instead of reacting to anxiety, what does it mean to be active, that or more responsive? So before we go further, defining anxiety. And I love this idea of a rocking chair. I want to clarify before we go any further that what I'm not talking about here is anxiety disorders. Those anxiety disorders that are diagnosed and someone's getting treatment for. What I'm talking about here is the anxiety that kind of runs through a system that is generalized, it's subjective, often it's anticipated. And like a rocking chair, anxiety kind of gets you going, but you don't really go anywhere, right? Anxiety is the mind and body's reaction to stress, to perceived threat, unfamiliar situations. And it impacts our limbic system, and it also impacts us physiologically. Anxiety impacts our whole body, our mind, and our body. And often, anxiety produces an automatic response to some sort of perceived threat. Now, there are 2 general types of anxiety. One of them is acute. Acute anxiety is time, or you might think of it as situation-based. This could be like someone losing a job, someone experiencing a car wreck, someone some kind of event that occurs in time that produces anxiety, and the body reacts, the person reacts, but that person is able to recover. That is, they're able to regain their perspective. This is crisis generated, and self-regulation, though, is possible when acute anxiety occurs. And the key here is the capacity to control reactivity. However, chronic is a whole different thing. It's a response to a threat, either imagined or exaggerated. And I've already, as I talked about that virus growing, that leadership virus growing, I went through some of the characteristics. Anxiety becomes structured when it's chronic. It becomes structured in, and then that person doesn't know how to function in any other way. They're always blaming. It's habitual. It's never their fault. They're focusing on others. They're always the victim. Their thinking is unimaginative. If I just had more information, if I just honed my techniques, then I'd have a better outcome, more data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, Peter Steinke says this, and I love this. He says it with chronic anxiety, it's as if instinct has a headlock on intent. Let that sink in just for a moment. Instinct has a headlock on intent. Now, so what are the triggers? I'm going to pop them up here in case you want to write them down. There are 6 triggers of anxiety: disruptions, feeling trapped, threat, differences, uncertainty, and depletion. Disruptions, feeling trapped, some kind of threat, differences, uncertainty, and depletion. But what I want to do is I want to go through each of these in kind, and I'm going to talk about them just a little bit. Disruption. This is forcible separation or division, right? And just think about a couple of these examples. Think about disruption in terms of change. We all of us were disrupted back in late February, early March. Our routines changed, our certainty changed. For many of our friends and family, there was loss. We were separated from each other. And this all of this creates a disruption. This is a primary trigger of anxiety in people. And if someone functions chronically, they're going to have some difficulty responding to this. However, others who can respond and in a more acute sense are able to regain their perspective and control their reactivity. But innovation also causes a disruption. One of in the field of higher education, one of the things we're wrestling with right now is how do we go back to school? We have some students who are not going to come back to campus. We have teachers who, because of health reasons, don't need to be on campus because of the potential. And so we have instigated or instituted, put in place a whole new system of both teaching in person and remote at the same time. This is innovation that is causing disruption. I know the local school systems are dealing with the same kinds of things. For those parents who work full-time jobs and have kids, this is a major disruption and a major source of anxiety. But what about accidents? Accidents, how many of you have been in an accident? Whether you caused it or not, this is a major disruption in so many ways. And how one responds to that anxiety is important. Feeling trapped. This is being deprived of strength or power. Strength or power. This is when one feels helpless, right? Helpless, hopeless, powerless, unable to influence an outcome. I don't think we really have to think too hard to come up with examples of this either. When's the last time you felt like you were trapped in a situation that you couldn't get out of? Perhaps you have friends or family who are trapped in a relationship that they felt powerless to control, or trapped in a job situation, or ministers out there who feel trapped because they've come to an understanding, but they're in an ecclesial context where they can't speak about that, right? Or you've come to some idea, you believe deeply in something, but you're not able to influence the outcome. This can be a strong driver, a strong indicator of anxiety, or one that precipitates anxiety. Feel helpless, hopeless. And it may be in situations of true helplessness, right? Anxiety can arise. What about threat? This is an indication of warning or some kind of probable trouble. This can be real or imagined. This is when someone senses potential harm or injury. Your survival instincts take over. That is your limbic system, your automatic responses, they take over instantly like this. And the old phrase, the wolf at the door, kind of comes to mind. Now, again, this threat can be real or imagined. And a lot of times, certainly it can be real. But I want you to think about those threats that are imagined, that are off in the future, that impact us now. I had a colleague say a while back in a series I did on Instagram, he said, depression is fear of the past, anxiety is fear of the future. I thought it was an interesting way of capturing anxiety. It's something that is in the future that kind of impacts us now, whether emotionally, intellectually, or physically, right? And in those times, our instincts take over. It's fight or flight. black or white, either or. And we don't have the ability to think in the moment. And someone who understands this, which I'll talk about in just a little bit, can begin to quickly, instead of react, respond. There's also the anxiety trigger of differences, the state or relation of being different. And in our culture, we're going through a lot of this right now, particularly with those last few, right? People across our country are saying enough is enough, and they're standing up and they're saying, we can't continue in this way. And what's happening on all sides of that conversation of Black Lives Matter, diversity issues, and the values that are embedded in those, and the contrasting ideologies, anxiety is triggered. And we've seen that play out in our cities. We've seen that play out in our streets. We've also seen it play out around our dinner tables, right? On social media. Differences trigger anxiety. And it's good to know this. If differences, opposites, or something that is strange, like, and I have a picture here of an age gap marriage, right? For many, this triggers anxiety because this just doesn't seem right. Some people would say. Other people are like, hey, you're fine with it. If they love each other, so be it. And we can think of many different examples of this trigger, but let me go on for purposes of time. How about uncertainty? This is the state of being uncertain. Doubts, ambiguity, the unknown, the unpredictable. For a lot of people, when they were furloughed back in March, lost their jobs, there is certainly uncertainty. There's doubts about the future. There's ambiguity. Don't know what is coming. This is unpredictable. We see this in work. We see this in our families. We see this in all systems at every level. Uncertainty is a common trigger. But also depletion. This decrease or exhaustion of the abundance of resources. This is this idea of lessening, a deficiency, this exhausting kind of wearing down reality. And I've heard some people use this language, you know what, I'm just zoomed out. So thank you for being here today. You know, it actually requires a lot of energy to look at a screen, because picking up on all of the facial expression when you're not in person, when you're doing it on screen, requires much more mental effort. And we don't recognize just how much that fatigues us sitting in front of a screen. And depletion is a trigger. And however depletion hits you, it can be a significant trigger of anxiety, one that we would do well to be aware of. So I want to give you this image. When you think about leadership and think about yourself as a leader, whatever system that you're operating in, think of yourself as a transformer. Now, I'm not talking about the robot. What I'm talking about is something like a step-down transformer. Step-down transformers, step-up transformers, we use in so many devices. I'm going to show you a big grid in just a moment. In fact, I'll show it to you now. Here is an example of a system on the large scale. You have the power plant that produces the electricity, and you have a step-up transformer that transmits the energy through the lines. And then as it gets to the houses, you have a step-down transformer that reduces the voltage or the power of the energy, let me use that, so that it can be consumed. What I'm advocating here is for leaders to be step-down transformers. That is, when the high anxiety comes in, and it's going to come in the form of these triggers, what I'm advocating for is that you function as a step-down transformer so that once it goes through, once it gets to you, you have a choice. You have a choice to react, or you have a choice to respond. Now, being aware of these 6 triggers will help you become that step-down transformer, right? So that you're not operating at high voltage, you're operating at a lower voltage. And when I was in the Army and was working on Chinook helicopters, we had 2 engines on either side of the helicopter, and often one of the engines would high side. That is, it would kind of wind up and we could hear it, and it impacted the entire system. Don't be the engine that high sides. Be the engine that runs at idle. Now, the language for this in systems is a non-anxious presence. Now, I don't believe anybody can be truly non-anxious, but we can be less anxious as a leader than other people in the room, other people in the system. Anxiety is catchy, it's contagious, but so is calm. Calm is also contagious. What kind of leader are you? Or what kind of leader can you be? Might be a better question. I love this chart here. I've recreated it from Peter Stenke's book, Uproar. Look there at the anxiety coming in. The innate threats, the learned threats, the new threats, these produce anxiety, and often people react, and when they react, they're thoughtless, they get defensive, and it creates automatic behavior. Same with explaining, justifying, defending, blaming, withdrawing. All of these produce anxiety and reactivity that lead to particular behaviors. So when you're thinking about yourself as a leader in your family, in your work environments, in your systems, it doesn't matter. What impacts you? How do you function, right? All right, let's go a little bit forward here. Self-awareness. I think self-awareness is key. As I've said before, it's about being straightforward and attentive. How do these triggers impact you and your systems? Now, as you're thinking about this, as you're thinking about these triggers, think first about how they impact you. That self-awareness is key. But then think about the systems that you're in. Maybe you're in a family system, you're in a work system, you're in a church system, you're in a nonprofit system, perhaps you function in government in some way. How do these 6 triggers impact the systems that you're in? And by the way, anybody who comes into a system brings all of their systemic stuff or their junk with them. Friedman identified, he talks about the 3 families of the pastor, the 3 families of the pastor. The family of origin, one's own family, and then the family of the church. The same is true in business and the corporate world, etc. And they overlap. You could be your family of origin, your immediate family. Think of these as concentric circles like this, and then your work system. Unresolved emotional processes from your family of origin will impact not only your immediate family, but will impact the work family as well, whether that's church family, whether that's nonprofit, it doesn't matter, the system, because the operating principles of emotional systems and relationships are universal. They're true across the board. So how do these triggers impact you and your system? Awareness enables conscious control. Awareness enables conscious control. And your emotionality really is key. And what I'm talking about here is anything in our behavior that is instinctive, automatic, and mindless. If you're aware, if you become aware, begin to pay attention to those triggers that kind of set you off, that make you respond instinctively or automatically, or you just have a mindless response to this. This is what I'm referring to, this emotionality. And being aware of emotional processes in a system helps you become more self-aware and enables you to be much more differentiated. That is, your presence connected to others, and so that you impact and influence, but you maintain yourself. So you're in connection, but you maintain yourself. You don't lose yourself. You don't become enmeshed. So here's what I want to do in closing. Anxiety can prompt adaptive change. There's no doubt about that. However, its intensity and length lead to reactive behavior. So what I'd like to encourage you to do is just make a simple chart right here of the 6 triggers on the left-hand side. We've got just a few minutes. Go ahead and make a list or make a mental list here. Disruption, feeling trapped, threat, differences, uncertainty, depletion. And in the right side, right hand of the column, just write adaptive or reactive. Adaptive or reactive. Just evaluate yourself. Become more self-aware of your leadership tendency in this regard. Are you more adaptive in response to these triggers, or are you more reactive? Being self-aware enables you to respond consciously in ways that won't not only benefit you, but benefit the people that you're in relationship with, no matter what the system is. I hope now at the end of this presentation, you can see rather succinctly just how important it is to not be reactive. Regulating reactivity is not an option. It's not an option if you're a mother in a family system, if you're a father in a family system, if you're the patriarch, the matriarch, if you're the executive director, if you're whatever it is, you're a teacher in a school system or your classroom. Regulating your reactivity is not an option. If you're not if you're not able to regulate your reactivity, you become basically, you are a up transformer. You take the energy in and you ramp it up and you send it right out into your system. And sometimes you might blow fuses, or to use the analogy, to blow people's ability to respond. Okay, I'll go ahead and bring my presentation to a close. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. Here's my basic contact information. I would love to now I'm going to stop the screen sharing, Candace, and go ahead and take any questions for the remainder of time that we have. Candace, are you there?
Hey.
There you are.
I did have one question. It was about the time that you were talking about using the transformer analogy and how calmness can also be contagious. It was from the CYMT group. It says, with this mindset, is the anxiety coming externally or internally, meaning are others anxious, or are you dealing with your own anxiety?
It could be both. It could definitely be coming from outside a system, say like the COVID pandemic, but it also could be one of those triggers that triggers some unresolved emotional pain or trauma in the past that is undealt with, that is just there bubbling below the surface and then can explode. So it can actually be both. And where it becomes particularly problematic is when it's both at the same time. When you have the external anxiety trigger, that then triggers internal realities that have not been dealt with. Both of those can come in and to use the transformer analogy, blow the system up. Absolutely. I see, can I put the contact information up again? Sure.
And if you're okay with me sharing it, I can include it in the follow-up email that I send out to everybody, Steve?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Are there other questions?
This has been really helpful. Somebody mentioned they didn't expect it to be so relevant to home and family. And it really is.
Yeah.
Pretty incredible how this information, like you said, can impact so many different areas of our lives and in whatever role we're in.
Oh, absolutely. I've found that what started off basically in psychology, psychotherapy, helping people, the principles are universal because we all relate to each other, and we all have deal with these emotional processes. When we think about leadership, we often think about those leaders who are out front, who are running companies, government, whatever. But the reality is, if you are an ineffective leader in your family, the same things result. And if you haven't dealt with that stuff, that junk from your family of origin, it will impact every system that you're operating in.
Yeah. Other recommended tools beyond self-awareness?
Oh, goodness. I think self-awareness, I think, is key. Find a few trusted people who are willing to tell you straight, who are willing to just kind of, they've known you a while, you've been in the highs and lows. While self-awareness, I think, is foundational, there are ways at getting at that self-awareness. And one of them is asking people to tell you, when this happens, how do I respond? Or how did I hurt you because of the way I responded? Um, how might I respond or better given these circumstances, etc. I really do think that the relationships we are in are key to helping us understand to better differentiate in the very relationships that we're in.
One more question, and then we'll probably close. What are a few of Steve's go-to strategies for stepping down in the moment? Back to the transformer analogy.
Yeah, so I think these are ones that have been shared in other environments, but I have found them to be helpful. And by the way, I don't always do this well, so I know I've learned great ways not to do it. Count backwards from 10 or from 5. The idea is to get your automatic limbic system, flight or fight, your lizard responses, to switch to your prefrontal cortex. So depending on where you are, maybe counting does that. Counting kind of brings you into the moment, right? It kind of anchors you, roots you in the moment so that you can respond. Some are better at this than others. Perhaps you're in a place, counting is a cognitive activity, and that's kind of what I'm trying to get to. So anything that activates the cognition, that allows you to move from an automatic response to something that produces cognition. Early in February, I had just learned that my grandmother was on her deathbed, and within a short amount of time, this is actually later February, she died. I was on the way to work, and I had just received this message from my aunt, getting off the off-ramp, and I saw the car in front of me get T-boned. And there were 3 women involved in this wreck, and immediately I was like, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, got out of the car and started taking care of business. It is a way for me, you really got to find your own way. Maybe it's tactilely doing it, so you bring yourself in, or it's whatever the case is for you. It's a way to kind of step down, root you in the moment so that you can respond effectively. And I imagine others have other ways of doing that as well. There's counselors on this call.
I've heard, noticing the things around you, spotting things, color,
Yes.
What is green around me? Or even like, if you have a moment, you wouldn't be able to in the wreck situation that you just mentioned, but like stepping around with your shoes off to just kind of tactilely bring you in, like the present moment, grounding type experience.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. All great examples, Candace.
Well, it's 2:00, so I just want to thank you so much for being here. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We really appreciate y'all's participation and you taking an hour of your time this afternoon to be here. That means a lot. Hopefully it was helpful information. I know it certainly was for me. And I will send y'all a follow-up email. It will include this link of the recording. If you want to go back and view it or get resources, I'll share Dr. Bonner's contact information with everybody as well. We will have 1/3 free event in August, so be on the lookout in your emails for the information about that one. That'll kind of wrap up this series leading up to our virtual self-care summit. And again, if y'all join the call a little bit late, we're hosting a summit September 14th through the 18th, and we will have 17 presentations throughout the course of that Monday through Friday. You can register for them, individually if there are sessions that stand out to you. You can also register with an all access pass to have the recordings for all of the different sessions that we have. We have a nonprofit group discount rate. So if you're a nonprofit leader and want to inquire about that, feel free to. And because y'all joined the call today, we'll be sending out a 10% off code for anybody to register for the Self-Care Summit. So I think that's all I have as far as announcements. Yeah, Steve, do you have anything else for us before we close?
Thank you all so much. You can follow me on Instagram at lms.consultant, Leadership Mediation Systems. I would love to engage you in conversation there, and we'll be sharing there on Instagram results from my research on adolescent conflict management. So I look forward to engaging you there. Love to hear from you.